So, welcome to another episode of the Vancrux Podcast. Today we have Justin McSweeny on, who is a fellow podcast host. So, welcome to today's show, Justin.
Hi, Jeevan. Thank you so much for having me and opening up this space for the two of us and for the audience as well.
I mean, to be fair, we spoke, I think it was last week at some point now, for
Yeah.
a pre-chat, as it were, to get to know each
hmm
other a little bit better. And to be fair, I was half inclined to sort of start recording at that point because we
Ah.
touched on quite a few cool topics and it was quite a free-flowing conversation. But I wanted to sort of save a lot of that, obviously, for the show. So
hmm
we talked a bit about purpose, didn't we? At some point, I think we covered quite a bit of ground as well. But what's your view on purpose? Is it something that is on the Aristotle side where everything has an inherent design, whether it's a cup or an eye or an arm, where we are designed and we have to discover that purpose? Or are you more on the Sartre side where we create a purpose, or are you somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, I might opt for that last point that we should allow ourselves or grant ourselves a flexibility for the sake of purpose in this sense to be able to oscillate in that regard. And I may lean more into Sartre's interpretation. I'm more of someone who sees reality as it unfolds, having a spontaneity to it rather than but then again, I might grant because Aristotle was informed by Plato, and he was very much about his forms or what I would call potential. I would be less rigid about some ontic geometric status to forms, right? And just say that forms are potential. And so that's where I would grant Aristotle some credence in that discussion or that dialectic is to say that to speak to how we navigate as living systems, we are confined and constrained. There's attractor states. We're canalized into things. Like I can't morph into another shape. I can't defy the laws of physics. So therein, I would suggest there are forms. There are limitations to the physical system that I am being able to navigate space and physics and all those kind of things. So I know I'm rambling, but I would say also that Sartre and existence precedes essence kind of thinking that purpose emerges. It's emergent, but nonetheless. So there's a tonos or a tension between eminence and emergence, right? Maybe that's a good way to find a synthesis in that. And the final thing I'll say is like Whitehead, who I like to try to understand, is he talks about a lure or an eros, like a draw into the future, and he might call that his God or whatever, but it's like that there in the concrescence of his reality and his becoming, that there is some kind of lure to that. And so that's a front end. Because sometimes when we think of telos or purpose, we think that purpose is sort of predestined or something that's, a will outside of our own, willing this living system to move to that, which speaks to eros, so he tries to soften that a little bit. So I'll stop there because we didn't have Whitehead in the original question. But
No, I mean this is the great thing about having open kind of questions where it can go off in so many tangents. You talked
oh,
about
I know.
potentiality there, obviously versus
hmm
actual, to actually become something, actuality in that respect.
hmm
Is it the potential or are you actually becoming something? And I think that's a key area that people should strive for. Yes, whether you believe we are or have it, as you said, a telos where it's a predetermined destiny, and whether that's
hmm
something that you're being drawn from a future perspective, or you believe that you have potential inside and you have the ability to create it. And
hmm
as you said
hmm
about the changing shape as well, I think that's a really interesting image. Is that, and I had a thought about this last week, not during our conversation, just happened to be at some point last
hmm
week, where is it that nurture is very important, depending on the books that we read, depending on
hmm
who we associate ourselves with, the country we were born up in, the language that we speak, all of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Is that limited by nature? In respect of, I could run every day for the rest of my life, I would never be as fast as Usain Bolt because my nurture is limited by a ceiling of nature for my genetic structure. Or
hmm
the other side of the coin would be intellect.
hmm
I could read as many books as I want about math and physics. If I don't have an IQ of 160 or 170, it's probably quite unlikely that I'm going to be able to comprehend those ideas in such a way that I can create some offshoot of that to create a new theory of some kind.
Right, right.
The Black Scholes models and quantum physics equations and Planck's
Hmm.
constant and all these sorts of things. And in order to do that, they had to have an element of nature or genetics that allowed their nurture to guide them towards that. Do you think there is something within that?
I'll invoke, there's so much in what you just said, so allow me to dance around a little bit in what you said. And so I'll start kind of towards the end of what you were saying. And there's a guy I follow who does cognitive science, and he calls one of our way-making capacities in life. So this cognitive system, this sense-making system, is constantly seeking relevance realization. It is to screen out the billions of inputs that are coming at us, bombarding us, and the combinatorial explosion of possible mental routes we can take to interpret our presence in reality, et cetera, et cetera. And so this relevance realization is a sense of framing. It's having the aperture at the right place, the right opening, and being able to cognize and perhaps recognize based on prior information. And so that's where I would maybe insert that there are those of us. So let's just say for a possible world, you, myself, and one other person have an IQ of 160. And that person, the other, because you and I think it's safe to include both of us in this, like, we'll never be quantum physicists or any other really complex physical science. But you and I might be equally apt or capable of other modes of thinking and achieving and cognizing and so forth. But this other person, again, as you say, by nature, the wiring upstairs and other aspects, and historically, the historicity of one's onboarding information, blah, 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 will afford them that opportunity to be the to show up as the quantum physicist because their relevance realization, their salience landscaping and mapping of things is distinct and different from ours. Because I think you and I, we could say we're, even if we're not at 160, we're bright, but we go into other venues and other avenues. And right now we're thinking very abstractly. We're not thinking like a physicist. We're not in STEM right now. We are thinking more in a sort of meta perspective on what physics informs the populace and humanity. So I would say that there is nature. There is that there could be three distinct individuals who have high IQs, very little variation in there, but that they're predisposed by way again through their onboarding of information from the past, through the way that they're wired. So we could say the hemispheric metaphor. They might be more left brain hemisphere, which is a little dicey in terms of neuroscience and cog sci, but we can use it as a metaphor here, and people can forgive us. But let's just say that guy, that person, that woman, or other gender or whatever is left brain dominant, and they're more inclined to see what's going on in those equations, and they can string things out really fast, and it shows up for them. It's relevance realization for them. Whereas you and I look at equations and, like, I get what they're doing, just at a real simple level, and I see the order of operation, and I can see what some symbols mean and blah blah blah. But for me, I don't see the elegance and the beauty in it, and I don't see where it can take me next. I just see it, and I can kind of follow along at a street level or whatever. But like I said, and I have a friend, she's just moving to Germany to teach quantum physics, and just, brilliant mind, but it doesn't exclude us from having other types of conversations. Her husband's a physician, so it's like he does ophthalmology, and so he has his niche, right? So anyway, that if that's a satisfacient answer, I would say that yes, it's a combination of what did that person onboard in every frame of their arriving at that stage where they are a competent physicist, and also what is the wiring like? What is the neurostructure like, such that that person can the conditions that allow for that? Because obviously genius shows up in so many ways, right? I mean, we all have a little genius in us, I think, and that can be nurtured out, or it can be shunted and repressed. And so there's affordances that need to be considered as well. As were the opportunities given for that even not even genius, but the just shining intellect to express itself to its fullest capacity. So I'll stop there and see if
Yeah,
there's
I mean,
you want to take
you
that.
touched on a lot there, and we will probably come on to talk about quantum physics at some point later on. I'm guessing as this conversation unfolds. But it's
Okay.
interesting you mentioned the word genius because I have a very, I don't know if it's a niche view or it's unique to myself. I'm not sure, but there's a lot of intelligent people in the world in terms of that, as you said, they can have some inputs, they can read a few books, and they can understand ideas, and they can use their rational thought and cognitive ability to understand those ideas and convey them with the other beliefs that they have into a discourse with another human
Mm,
being. For
mm,
me, genius is those individuals who actually created those ideas in the first place, the ones that came up
mm,
with these original thoughts, with that sort of inspiration, without the level of input that we may have as individuals who read these nuanced ideas that have come from 5 years ago, 2,000 years ago, in terms of philosophers or
mm,
scientists or whatever. But to have the the foresight to be able to create experiments to try and solve this dilemma or create a mathematical equation to find an answer or whatever it may be, or to design a vehicle, the first car, someone actually thought of that in the mind before it became reality in the physical world. So for
right.
me, that's sort of where I see genius is. And okay, you could tier a genius, couldn't you? You could look at genius in terms of IQ. Are they over X percent? Are they in the 90th percentile, or is it something else? And again, you could
Hmm.
break that down into multiple aspects. Where do you think this creation comes from? Do you think there's an element of, okay, as you said, the inputs from what someone has read or thought about in their life, plus their IQ has created that? Or do you think we are sort of antenna that pick up things from the universe and it was always there, like maths was always there. We didn't create it, we discovered it to an extent.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay, let me get a little weird for a second and let me process what you just said. I agree with you that genius is that capacity to dip into the imaginal realm and come out with something novel. And so it's a type of medium or weak emergence. Or even some might go as far as to say it's a kind of strong emergence where you get somebody who had put some wires and silicon together and they got something that can do crude computational process or machinic quasi-intelligent things, and that's happened. There are people at vector points in history that did those things. Yeah, and I think that's what you're pointing to in creative genius. I have a book on the shelf back here that's called The Superhuman Mind by Barrett Brogard. I interviewed her. She's a philosophy of mind at University of Miami in South Florida, and she has a lab down there. Her book, Superhuman Mind, cites examples of savantism that was accidental. So there's an instance where there was somebody who was about my age, slacker, living, at home, not doing much. He was pummeled severely by a baseball bat when he was being mugged. And again, a do nothing, ne'er do well kind of person prior to the assault. After the assault, the brain damage, the TBI, scrambled his eggs in such a way that when he came out of it, he became, and I can provide the person's name and all that if somebody's curious to look this up. He became an artist. His art is very much geometrically informed. It is, if you see his work, you see that there is somebody there who understands geometry, and by hand, I believe freehand is creating these works that his brain somehow has the capacity to now to work with. So was there an unlocking there, or was there just a perspectival shift or a mode of thinking, a modal shift of thinking? We can't answer that. But what we understand now is that this person was granted that access. There was another case in the book where a young man in Chicago was shot in the head and part of his head was taken off, and coming in through after recovery you could it almost became like people who are high up on the autism spectrum that have unfettered access to like immediacy of information, but then the trade-off is there's too much, it's like too much going on and it becomes very upsetting and unnerving. Well, this kid that was shot, you could tell him a date. You could say October 7th, 1985, or December 4th, and he would tell you the weather, he would tell you what happened that day, and a priori he didn't look it up, he just knows, right? So these are kind of instances that this woman, Dr. Brogard, cites in her book, Professor Brogard cites in her book, and there are a few other cases that she puts in there. But anyway, I say all that ramble to express perhaps some caution when we define genius, because again, there is however you turn genius into a verb, geniusing of persons who may not have been following the course or trajectory of like high IQ or, because the one kid had part of his cortical capacity shot off. And there are cases of other people who have microcephalia or other like hydrophilic mind, cortical interference and pathologies and stuff, and they're still capable of reason and faculty and things like that. So anyway, it speaks to this kind of fluid nature of and is genius perceived correctly, and how do we rank genius and all these kind of things. So then let me see, I'm getting lost in another part of what you were saying. What I would also posit is that to speak more metaphysically about genius, that it might go back to our conversation about telos. And so I like working with triadic systems. And so when we speak to the telos, or the telos rather, and thinking about Aristotle's idea of a realm of what I would again call potential, or maybe it'd be a realm of forms or whatever, archetypal, things that can be uh, worked with. I would say that for me, when it comes to purpose, I put sense and meaning in front of purpose as a triadic system, so that there's sense data that's onboarded, converted into meaning in our cognitive capacity, and then purpose becomes again relevant to us. It's the relevance realization, the salience that pops out to us. It stands out to us from the obscure or the mundane, or the trivial or whatever. So I would say that in purposing or seeing what purpose might be, whether it's again imminent or emergent, is that it requires an intelligent system to function with that. And I might posit that intelligence is on a continuum. I might posit that consciousing, again, I like to verb everything, right? So consciousing and intelligencing is on a spectrum. So in other words, and I've interviewed people who do research with single-celled animalcules who are habituating their behavior. A single cell, it can habituate to do things. The training doesn't last long. It's, single cell, so you get a few hours or a day or two, but you get response. I've interviewed a guy who's a biologist, and he has something you can look up, xenobots, and it's a skin cell from a frog, single cell. And he just switched some of the ion channel communication capacity of that cell, and it became autonomous. It had motility. It would do kinematic replication on other cells and activate them to do, maze. They can do mazes and stuff. So anyway, I speak of intelligence as this wonderful, mysterious thing, and people get so fraught with consciousness conversations. But I want to go back one step and say that consciousness is just part of the package of intelligence or intelligencing. And there's, so anyway, I'm rambling. But to get back to genius, like, well, genius, and you said something a moment ago, like, are we tapping in? I think so-ish, kind of like, yeah, it's not that. So some people would say like we are receivers, we are antennas for like consciousness and things like that. But I would say that as we complexify as intelligent systems, aggregations of cellular intelligence or whatever, because intelligence is just problem solving, and all our cells do that. They all, we are embodied minds basically. That there's a high end that maybe we're not even tapping into yet, and so if there were a potential creature that had a third cortical fold or some other means of processing information, who knows where it would go. So I'll stop there because I'm
Yeah,
starting to get
yeah. I
weird.
mean, to be fair, it's a spectrum with anything.
Yeah,
Anything you
yeah,
can think of
everything's on a
is a
continuum.
spectrum. And
Yeah.
you've at this end, you've got purpose, where the sort of meaning of life is to find this purpose and be that inner genius and create things
Mm,
and be in touch with the universe. But
mm.
then on the other side, you've got the sort of myth of Sisyphus, where actually life is just about pushing a boulder uphill. You get to the top, it rolls down, and you go and you do the same again. It's about sort of suffering and hardening yourself and learning these life lessons. Do you think that there's something in the middle of that, where instead of this purpose being this magical thing that we are striving towards, or that we are judged on, have you found are you just a 9 to 5 slave, or have you sort of found your calling in life? Or on the flip side, the myth of Sisyphus sort of like, yeah, we're just here to suffer and push the boulder uphill. Or is there a middle ground somewhere potentially?
Yeah, and Nietzsche rather, addressed this with the eternal recurrence to speak to the Sisyphean task. And so the eternal recurrence is a thought experiment that he designed to say, if you woke up tomorrow to start your life over again, knowing all the shit, excuse me if I can use bad words, the shit that's going to happen, uh, Okay. In your life, would you live it again? Would you be able to have the amor fati, as he would say, the satisfaction of living that life, knowing that, you had bad things happen and you're going to repeat that? And that's to me is speaks to the Sisyphean task. So I'd say Nietzsche started he danced with us a little bit. But what I would say perhaps is that I'm I don't know if there's a ism for this, but I'm of the mind that there again is spontaneity in the universe unfolding. And one thing I do is it's probably not heterodox, it's probably not controversial to say this, but I get this kind of like Taoist Buddhist-y thing going where there's no distinction. There is no universe. The systems that we are, all of our cells, all the molecules and atoms that we are, it's a singularity. It's still a singularity. We distinguish things. That's again what physics does. We go from particles up to, or potential to particle, and bring in quantum up to these really, really complex things, or that bookshelf back there that's pretty complex too. There's a lot of stuff going on there. Uh, but it's to me like unitarity. Okay, that's an interesting word because unitarity can be units or unity. Yeah, unity could be units or it could be a togetherness, a unity of things or a unitarity of things. And so I like that word because it has two things going on at the same time. And if I were to get on a soapbox and be critical of all of us in the West, is that we have a real hard time holding a paradox, or the union of opposites, as Heraclitus would say, the tonos that we can generate in that is so rich. And again, this is the continuum. This is the yes to both, kind of thing. So I'll stop there. But yeah, just exploring the idea that there is distinction, but at the same time there is only a singularity, and that gives us, to me, a little more freedom and flexibility to maybe understand, like you said, the Sisyphean task versus the where's our bliss? Where is not utopia, but where is that happy ground? And you've mentioned eudaimonia in your channel in your podcasts before, and ataraxia and eudaimonia are very key words in my canon to say that that is that steady state. And so if you are in a Sisyphean trough and peak life, okay, but you can, so this, stoicism is really popular, but this speaks to resilience and anti-fragility, is that, like the physical life, the necessary life to be part of the market system, et cetera, can demand this of you, but you can find a place for yourself maybe mentally where you are in the eudaimonic spectrum, or co-occurrence with the peak. So in other words, peaks and troughs have a line for you to vector for where that's going. So that could be eudaimonia. So I'll stop there because we brought in
Yeah.
eudaimonia, and that's a
Yeah,
big word.
we'll probably go on to talking about how to create a good life and how to have that joyous at some point. I just want to stick with purpose for a moment because I think this is
Yeah,
a
yeah.
really good point. We've talked about so far sort of what purpose is and whether it's preordained or something we create,
Hmm.
and sort of the types of purpose to an extent, and whether it's a Sisyphean side or the other end of that sort of so-called spectrum. But
Hmm.
what if we should never know our purpose? I heard something on a podcast once about an example of a cow. So, for example, let's make the assumption that a cow is made for human consumption.
Hmm.
And yeah, whether you're a meat eater or vegan or vegetarian is not the point. Just make the assumption for this particular sort of thought experiment. If the cow knew its purpose, that it was there to be eaten by human beings, that's its sole purpose on this earth, or whether it's a sheep or a chicken, that's its sole purpose.
Hmm. Hmm.
Would after the cow had been told that, would it change its behavior to try and divert away from that purpose? So, for example, if you're a general in an army and the soldier's purpose in that particular army was you have seven battles and you know that you have to lose these two in order to win these five battles, for example, if you've got seven more or seven battles going on at once, and you know that in order to win the war, you have to, or the larger campaign, you have to lose these two battles. And the purpose of one of the soldiers in those two losing armies, his purpose was to die for the greater good. So the
Hmm.
question is, well, should we actually ever know our purpose? Because if we did and we were unhappy with what that may be, we would try to steer away from that um, in a way that would have knock-on effects. It's like the example of, I don't know, I can't remember the mathematician's name, who said, if pool or billiards, where you've got the triangle and you hit the ball into the triangle, of balls and they go all over the place. It seems to be random. But if you knew the calculation of exactly how hard you hit the ball, which spin you put on the ball, how soft or firm the cushions were, you would be able to predict to 100% accuracy exactly where those balls would land.
Hmm.
So is it a case then that we shouldn't know our purpose? Or, well, I mean, what's your view on what I said there, essentially?
Well, I might get a little skeptical about the capacity to have a revelation to know our purpose. And it's funny you bring up the cow analogy because I have a friend and we joke when we go past cow pastures that there are certain cows that aren't as fat as other cows, and we joke that that cow got the information they know, and they're not going to eat. They're going to be skin and bones, and they're going to prolong their lives as long as possible because they know, right? So, but that's just humor. To speak to the general in the army, that's a means to an end. We have to get into that big ethical sticky wicket about what justifies the means to an end. And war is about that, right? War is a leader, so-called, a general or an authority in the structure, having to make determinations, knowing that they're going to kill people, the people they like, the people on their team, and that to me is an ethical dilemma, and it's one that is, our human history is replete with that, and so, but to speak to purpose in that regard, if those sacrifices are noble, and I don't know if I could cite an example where that would be a case, because I would then ask, well, was it preventable? Was the ends sought? Were there other routes to those ends? And those are usually the polity or so cultural political things that could have been done. So anyway, that's a whole nother thing. But I would say that the purpose in that, the die was cast already. The general was put in. He has his role, or she has her role, in the place of determining who's going to die. And so the again, the Sisyphean ball is already rolling in that sense. And now to speak a little more abstractly, when we talk about the capacity to have a possible future and know a possible future. I'll bring up that weird thing about Laplace's demon when they talk about this sort of free will determinism kind of argument, which I think is silly. But anyway, I'll bring Laplace's demon in here. And Laplace said, well, what if there was this demon that knew the point of, knew everything about the universe and all the fixed points and and we see causally closed universe, causal determinism, everything, blah. It's the determinist argument in against free will. But it's interesting to think of a paradox that arises from Laplace's demons existing and having that knowledge. If Laplace's demon came to me and said, Justin, in a week, you're going to do something that will be averse to your overall health. I don't want to jinx myself. I'm not superstitious, but I won't really say like, let's say I burn my finger on something, and it's like I get that prior knowledge, even though it's a fixed determined system. And so by default, there is a pre-existing purpose in the future, because Laplace's paradox that I get is that if Laplace knows, but he tells me, does that change the trajectory of that future? Because now I know, and I'm going to not burn my finger next Wednesday or whatever.
It's a
So
grandfather paradox, isn't it? Even, time.
yeah, yeah,
It's like
yeah, you
it's like if
could,
you go back and kill your
right.
granddad, then it's that whole paradox, isn't it?
Yeah, or if I could go back in time and game the stock market in 1975 and start buying in on IBM and all
Yeah,
and
Apple,
cascade out through
McDonald's.
Microsoft, all that, I'd be a bazillionaire right now, and I'd probably be dead because I would have overconsumed or something. But yeah, so there's those paradoxes that arise. But again, the Laplacian demon is the forward paradox, not the
The
going back
invert,
in
the
time.
reverse, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, going back in time. So what I find fascinating about this thought experiment that Laplace came up with is, if the demon came to me and said, "Here's some, good insider information about what's going to happen to you," well, then that would affect how the future unfolds. So
Yeah,
that
the
doesn't
cause,
really,
isn't it?
yeah, it doesn't really
Cause
point to
and
anything, but it also makes me feel better about positing that there's probably nothing but spontaneity ahead of us, and the probabilistic nature of the next unfolding of the frame of reality that comes into play. Now, having said that, though, there are so many things that guide and influence that collapsing of the next frame of reality for all of us, because of all our histories, all of the things that we do, and conditions that arise. So, like if I committed a crime, I have to go to trial, and I get caught, I have to go to trial. So that you set these canalizing, these stronger channels for you to follow. for the attractor to follow, which the attractor is, your mindedness moving through by way of your behavior and the acts that you committed prior to that, good, bad, or otherwise. So
Yeah, I
if
mean,
that speaks to purpose in any
yeah,
way.
yeah. I mean, it's coming on to you because at the start of that sort of answer, if you want to call it an answer, or obviously just a discourse anyway, you said something about sort of ethics and morals, and if we
Hmm.
to because we sort of brushed on it lightly with, or you did rather, regarding the army, and you said it's it's part and parcel of war, etc. It's kind of like the trolley car problem, isn't it? With regards to, utilitarianism versus deontology. Is it the actual action that's ethically? Because you mentioned about God as well within that sort of argument. Is it the end goal the best for most people, or is it actually the actions from your perspective that is more important? If you use a trolley car as an example, or something else that I'm sure you're aware of,
Yeah, I've heard people break down the trolley car a few different ways, but I'd say it comes down to a perspectival knowing. So I have my perspective from a third person, uh, separated from all of the consequences of what's going to happen, and I would just give an opinion about who is the least culpable in the harm created or generated. But then there is the perspective of the person on the rail. There's a perspective of the three or four other people on another rail, or how, whatever your potential disaster might be. And then there's a perspective of the trolley conductor that has to pull the lever, and you're sort of vicariously thinking for that as the third person, like me, if I were asked that question, so it's all perspectival. Like obviously nobody on any of the rails, any of the probabilistic scenarios of somebody getting killed would be in favor of the thing even happening, right? So they'd be like, but I mean that doesn't really solve anything. But I would say, I think we all have to land on our own spot with that kind of argument. I mean, yeah, you have the utilitarian. Well, of course you kill one person to save five, or whatever the rational argument is. But then again, you stand back and you say, well, yeah, he still killed somebody, and were there alternatives to that? Was there a third braking redundancy, or was there some way to derail the car, but then you're going to injure the passenger? So to me, it's insoluble, right? And to get a satisfying outcome for ethics and morality, right? I mean, it's a no-win situation. So it's really not, to me, it won't, I mean, and somebody could come along and argue this out of me, and I could change my mind, but I would say that there's no good outcome to that. So it's,
Yeah.
it's not giving us a good, satisfying question about, what is our ethical grounding, and where is our compass, in that particular situation.
I think again, you could sort of evolve that trolley car problem to not just the one and four and the conductors you said, Preston and Levy. You could
Right.
adapt it to say, well, the the four people are bad people, or the one person is a bad person. Or you could say, well, what if a bloke is standing at the top of a bridge above the tracks and you had to push him over
Mhm.
onto the tracks to save the four? Would you do it? And there's a lot of sort of complexities. Do you know the people? Would you would
Mhm.
you kill the four to actually save one? That it was
Mhm.
your daughter, your son, your parent.
Right.
So I think there's a lot more complexity to and nuance to moral arguments than purely mathematical.
Dry. Yeah, yeah. And what you're doing is Bayesian statistics. You're saying, okay, I got you a problem here. You're the conductor of a trolley car, one body on a rail and four bodies on a rail. What do you do? And then now that what you just said, but that body on the rail is your child, and the four bodies aren't, and they're strangers, or they're criminals. That's a Bayesian updating. That's a Bayesian calculus, because then you're like new information changing my priors. Because before you'd probably still want to maximize the efficiency of less carnage, or killing or whatever. But now that your child is that one on the rail, then that's a no-brainer for most people, right? Like my child comes before me. As somebody said the other day, my heart comes out of me into my child. It's like, yeah, that is your life. And if they're criminals, then we're gonna, as a society collectively, we'd feel less guilt if they had done some transgression and they were bad people or whatever, because then we'd be like, we minimize their humanity in some way. But so that's like you said, I'm agreeing with you 100%. That's complexifying a situation. That's the same thing with the general. Like the general has to make so many calls on the spot, right? He has to update his priors constantly because of four battlefronts or five battlefronts. Yeah, things change all the time. It's very fluid. It's like that whole thing where they joke about everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, and it's like, well, the general's, yeah, he's getting punched, and his kids are dying. The ones he's trying to lead, they're all dying, and so yeah, it's a mess.
And the reason I don't mention that is because obviously you could lead that up to a much wider perspective instead of the general and the multiple armies. It could be well, God, he had these decisions to make, and yes, in your on your smaller 2D model, let's say, of the universe, it's like, well, why did this happen to me? Well,
Yeah.
first question I'll ask is, who would you rather it happen to, first of all? But that's slightly off topic. It's the like the example of, if your child asks for sweets over and over again, you're not going to keep giving them sweets because you know better than to give them sweets in terms of their health will deteriorate, their teeth may rot. Maybe there's something else that you aren't aware of that the universe, the higher power, whatever, is aware of in terms of these trolley car problem arguments, if that makes sense. It's a whole example as well of, vegans say, well, why eat meat? Just and as opposed to just eating vegetables. And
Hmm.
then I just say to him, look, so you're telling me your ethics is that above nature? Like, what makes you think that your moral argument is better than that of nature itself, if that makes sense? So there's a
Hmm.
lot in terms of that. Do you think there is an element of that, and in terms of, because this is one of the problems with why people become atheists? They say, well, the problem of evil, isn't it?
Yeah.
Why does God have no? Either he can't stop evil, in which case he's sort of no God at all, or he can and doesn't, which case he's sort of malevolent, as it were. What's your sort of viewpoint on that?
Okay. For the audience, I'll identify as an agnostic non-theist. So I'm not an atheist, I'm not a theist, but it doesn't mean I've given up on anything, any skin in that game, any arguments. It's
So,
just
so
I
is that
step
is
back.
that is that like deism then? Would you say?
No, no, it's agnostic is just complete ignorance. I would challenge any human being on this planet to get in front of me with a straight face and tell me they know God. That's it. That's a simple pro. And a rabbi came up with agnosticism. So he put some thoughts into this. Yeah, and he's supposedly a man of God. But anyway, but it's apophasis. It is to say one cannot know. It is a negative type of theology. I'm totally, and I love using the word God. To me, it's an algebraic placeholder for that which we cannot. It's insoluble. It's ineffable. Blah blah blah. So, but to come back to reality for a second, I would say. With regard to evil and God or the universe, that's the Odyssey. That is the question of evil. And some people will go the privatio bonio. Sorry, my Latin sucks, but privatio bono, I think, is the term. It is the privation of man. It is to say that man has strayed from the true, the good, and the beautiful, to get Neoplatonistic for a second. So there's that. There is also the Protestant or more modern argument about, well, no, we have free will and you're a bad person and you made a terrible decision. But they don't think about the fact that that person may have been pathologic, just had this terrible history of abuse and torture, which turned them into a psychopath that then they react. It's not to excuse them. It's just to say there's a history there. And it's not that they made they woke up one day and say, I'm going to peel the skin off that person's face right now just because it's Tuesday. They did that because they were tortured as a child. They had no moral compass, in the people they introjected and imprinted on and so forth like that. So there's always a story behind why somebody does something. It's not to excuse it, but is to say that's a kind of privation. Is that they were deprived of a decent childhood where they can tell the difference between don't peel that person's face off. That's not right. Or they just see it as acting out the violence that was set upon them. Maybe they were burned or beaten or electrocuted as children or raped or whatever god awful scenario you want to come up with. So to what I would do is to say this is why I love spontaneity. This is what, and when we want to talk about quantum physics, guess what's happening down there? At least as far as we can determine or not determine, that as Einstein said, God doesn't roll dice, or whoever said that, but you know, it is dice rolling. It is spontaneity, but it's predicated by or canalized by history, right? It is canalized by things that come in from the past to determine the next frame of what's going on. So in a sense, this this historical kinetic energy of all the actions that I committed up until this moment lead me to do perhaps the next thing that I'm going to do. And this is straying a little bit from like how do we deal with evil, but it just points to the fact that absent of the mythologizing of the future or a mythogenetic perspective of the future that is again using a sort of willed God, an omniscient God that directs and does things by their will. Um, if we are uh, mostly free-willed individuals. I don't believe in free will necessarily, but I grant us a lot of will that we make decisions that have consequences and that those consequences carry us forward. And this goes back to Whitehead, right? And Whitehead talks about the concressing of actual occasions from both the information of perished objects from the past. He uses really obnoxious language. And he has his own kind of forms that he talks about. They're eternal objects or something like that, and they are potentia, and that the potentia concress into the next moment of reality. And he says the many are one and increased by one. So the many become one and then are increased by one by any quantum of action into the future by any system. Whether it's an autopoietic system like a storm or a living cognitive system like ourselves. And one last thing, and then I'll be quiet, is the mythos of the Edenic narrative of the serpent, the garden, the fall into knowing. That was a great didactic because it talks about metacognition and the capacity. My cat doesn't have the cognitive light cone that I do. I have a cognitive light cone that affords me the capacity to commit evil acts. If a cat rips a mouse to pieces, it's just hungry. If I rip somebody to pieces, it's because I don't like them or I'm a sociopath and I get pleasure in dismembering people. But I did that because I am building a metacognitive perspective of what it would be like to do that and what it would be like to act in this way and what gratification and hedonic hits do I get from terrifying somebody or killing them and harming them or whatever. So metacognition plays a huge role, and that's why I think there's a lot of value in the Edenic myth about the fall of man or people. It is that and Jung speaks to this, we fall into metacognition, we fall into capacity to know better. And that goes to the vegan argument. That's why the vegans, and I don't eat a lot of meat myself, but vegans can be kind of obnoxious. And I'm sorry for any vegans out there that aren't obnoxious, but there are some obnoxious ones out there who are very, bad for their cause. But to speak to veganism, which I do support to an extent, but not really, it is to say that we should know better when we eat a cow. Now, I don't completely agree with that because there are cultures who are not as Western modern as we are, and they, use the blood of cows to make yogurt in the desert because there's no real good source of protein. People living above the Arctic Circle that really need seal meat because there's no vegetables up there, guys. So there's don't argue with those people. That's what they do. That's my argument against veganism is us in the Western world who have the privilege of being able to buy expensive vegetables and vegetable-based products. Great. But if somebody's living in a desert or an Arctic environment, I'll shut up in a second, but
But who determines
throw
what's
that
right?
vegan argument.
The thing is, who determines what's right and wrong? And I know what you're saying with regards to we have the most rational cognitive mind. I
Hmm.
don't know if it was Aristotle or Plato that said there's sort of three types of creatures, isn't it? It's like one is just based on,
Oh yeah.
just the fact it's a plant because it can just exist essentially, and then you get more loving animals like dogs and cats that sort of you can see that they have sort of a soul to an extent, but then human is uniquely different in terms of we have this whole cognitive awareness that allows us to make decisions. But then you would say, well, where do you draw the line? Because for some societies this is the line, for other societies this is the line, and well, how do you determine who's right and wrong? Because some things have to be binary and some don't. That these decisions people make they've made it binary on a
Hmm.
non-binary
Yeah. Yeah.
spectrum, which is crazy. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and that's why I was poo-pooing certain vegans, not all vegans. Don't get triggered and start freaking out. But some vegans, and this is so I'll get on my psychological soapbox. People co-opt causes for the sake of their narcissism. So you get the social justice warrior, you get the vegan, you get the activists of whatever flavor and stripe, and it goes all across the political and cultural spectrum. But their need to be validated and seen and get the likes and the emojis on their social media platforms, they will co-opt veganism and then thrust or project their own whatever it is, whether it's a sociopathic tendency or it's just pure narcissism to gratify themselves. It's public masturbation,
It's
basically.
virtue signaling, isn't it?
It is that's one of the manifestations, but it's basically public masturbation. It's like, and some people are genuinely sincere about furthering causes for egalitarian means, but you usually don't hear from them because they're busy working instead of, like you said, performative altruism or virtue signaling or righteous indignation or shaming, which is a characteristic of a narcissist, is to shame the person who eats a hamburger. How dare you eat a hamburger? That kind of mental. And the same thing for, the carnivore argument. They'll look at the vegan and they'll say, "Hey, soy boy, what the, blah, blah, blah." So it's all typical human nonsense. But going back to what you said, I agree. It is not on a binary, and we got to stop this binary thinking. It's false
100%.
dichotomy.
And
It's
you
false
mentioned,
dichotomy.
I mean, you mentioned narcissism, and it's sort of still sort of on the subject of the universe and God and things like that. Then, because, and this is the thing with religion for me, they all argue over the attributes of God, essentially, the attributes of what is wanted. Some say, you need to pray this many times a day. Some say you need
Hmm.
to cover your head. Some say you can't eat these certain animals, but everything else is fair game. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, surely, and this is why I've sort of come back to this, because the word narcissist, surely if God wants you to say his name 20 times a day and pray to him, does that not make God in that particular, in their viewpoint, a narcissist within himself?
This is what I would call theogenesis. And so let's just grant, if you don't mind, if people are willing, if they're not mad at me already by anything, let's grant that there may be a theistic presence or a deistic presence. There may be the totality, the pars pro total of reality is a God. But then let's just look at our human history. When we generate religion, when we create religion, it is a social engineering project. A lot of that social engineering project had great value. Moses in the desert, he had all these people raping sheep and screwing each other's wives and stuff like that. And he had to come up with these really important rules and didacts that said, 10 of them in his case, that don't rape the sheep and don't kill your neighbor and honor your parents and all this kind of stuff. That's social engineering. That's deontological prescriptive. That is boom, 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 here you go. Don't cross this line. Or that guy up there is going to kick your ass. He's really vengeful and wrathful. But yes, I totally agree that God that we created is very narcissistic when we have to prostrate to him, and we have to pray continuously, beg forgiveness for his mistake, all this, which is Christianity in a perverse form, which I don't poo-poo all of Christianity, but that's one way of, when we're begging forgiveness for being born, that our mother committed the ultimate sin by giving birth to us.
It's
Oh,
crazy,
come
yeah.
on,
It's like
come
there's like,
on,
like the one thing that would
we're
would
going
would
down the wrong rail.
yeah, like the one thing that it will allow for the survival of the species is somehow deemed sinful.
Hmm.
If people cover up and stuff like that, and you're saying, well, oh, God wants us to do it. Well, surely if God created you, he'd want you to show off your beauty to the world rather than sort of covering up. And people say, oh, well, God created us in his image. I would say the other way around. We've actually created God in our image because obviously we've anthropomorphic. We've given it, as you said, human characteristics, and he's here to forgive it. I don't think that it's not on that realm. Like, I'm more on the deistic side with regards to my sort of belief system, where
Hmm.
technologically, the whole watchmaker argument is that you can sort of see there is an inherent design to the universe, and we'll come on to quantum physics, I'm sure, shortly as well. But I don't think that God gets it, or the universe, because God has got too many negative connotations as a word. Because if we're arguing
Yeah.
God, some people think, oh, this is what you mean, this is what you mean. So not really, that's not really the idea here. But you can see
Hmm.
the evidence of a level of creation, whether you are religious or you believe in simulation theory, whatever it may be. But I don't think that a God would get involved in day-to-day decision making. Coming back to what we talked about, the pool table where you break up the balls and it moves around. You said something
Yeah.
along the lines of cause and effect, and you can go back historically. So if that's the case, everything that exists now, if you can mathematically create a cause and effect, everything as it is now could have been calculated to be exactly so. If
Hmm.
everything has a cause and effect and you know the effect of a particular cause, you can sort of play out where we are today for 100 years. And if you knew the maths involved for it, you could predict
Hmm.
to the millisecond what would happen. This is what's crazy because that's the whole determinism free will thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you
Yeah.
hard determinist, hard on the free will side, or soft determinism?
Yeah.
Where does that lie? It's interesting because it's a rational discussion that people have to
Hmm.
have. It's because this is the thing with AI, for example, because AI is a big thing at the minute. The
Yeah.
whole argument of rationalism versus basically sensory experience. The senses lie to you. You can watch a video now on AI, and you will believe it's real when you watch it because it's getting that good. Only because we have
Hmm.
rational thought that we now, like obviously the empiricists would say, oh, it's always to do with sensory experience. Where the rationalists would say, well, actually, only rationally, and then you have to deduce it can't be real because this individual would never have done that based on my understanding of that person's morals and political stance and all this sort of thing. So do you think that's a big problem with regards to the future of society? Because we're having this discourse now, having read
Hmm.
certain things and having a certain cognitive awareness, shall we say? Do you think AI is
Yeah.
going to reduce that on a future basis and actually we will lose skills as a society? You already see that with the kids, they're all on their phones playing games and not really having a social discourse where they are losing those soft social skills and emotional intelligence, as they say. Do you think that's going to be a big
Yeah.
issue over and the other thing is with AI is that will the internet then become dead because you can then no longer differentiate between right and wrong in terms of true and false, shall we say? Then you cannot make a decision or have a viewpoint based on the information because the information you can't trust the sources, if that makes sense. Like this whole Wikipedia,
Yeah.
kind of in that respect.
Yeah, that becomes again where relevance realization gets hijacked and the combinatorial explosion and the potential for sorting out what is real becomes derailed or so deeply obfuscated that it becomes impossible. And what I would hope for AI, and this is not a prediction, it's just wishful thinking, is that we're going to go through a period of hype and hyperbole and hoopla and blah, blah, blah. And then it'll fade around back into the background. It's not going to have all the use and utility that we think it does right now. I think it's just going to be a good mechanical slave, just like a steam engine was, 180, 200 years ago. I think it's going to fade back because unless this is our vehicle for self-destruction, and not the machines not the servers themselves, but like us just fighting over uh, again, some of the distortion and the hallucination and the slop that occurs from this that causes we're already in this deep state of discord as a culture anyway. We're already, not we, but a lot of people are willing to kill each other for their sake of their feelings or just to prove a point, and it's kind of silly. But to get back to AI, I think whatever purpose it can serve, it is strictly a background utility. It's just like our desktops or our phones or whatever. It's there as ostensibly as a means of convenience and a means of facilitating information processing a little bit faster. But there are people imposing consciousness and will on and sentience and personhood and agency to these things, and it's like no, these are just number crunching little. It's gates and valves. It's
But
still
that's
gates and
now.
valves.
No, but that's now. It's like LLMs. But what if general sort of AI comes out in respect of and you use an example of the steam train, but it's like the horse. The horse and car went to the car at some point, and obviously those jobs were lost and society changed. But I think the problem with AI is because it's versatile, you could
Mhm.
find a position where 20, 30, 40 different roles all go at once, which
Mhm.
I think is going to have a much bigger impact. I don't know what your thought is on that.
Well, I think it will have an impact on the market system. I think jobs are going to go away, and you hear all this silliness about UBI and th universal basic income and things like that. And I think that's just crazy. And so it's going to affect us from the market and enterprise, and that's so deeply intertwined with the state here in the United States that there's going to be a shakeup there. Which is why I would wishful thinking. I'd want to see it just go into the background so that engineers can use it for efficiency's sake, for doing physics, chemistry, engineering, medicine, all these things that it could really actually have. And rather than being our God, rather than being our girlfriend or boyfriend, rather than being our therapist, that's all bullshit to me. That's all just complete bullshit. And the sentience and the consciousness is, to me, is bullshit. It's silicon. It didn't have the evolutionary trajectory that we do. It's not a biological system. It does not have, they're talking about it being able to feel pain now. No, it can give you the simulacra of pain. It can give you the pseudo experience, reporting itself like a Turing type, thing to you, but it's never going to awaken one day and become HAL 2000 or some sort of whatever we want to project onto it. I think that's a lot of our existential nihilism and fear of nihilism coming out, that we need a new God. We've killed some other gods and now we need a new God, and AI is our God and it's our savior, it's our lover, our teacher, our sage, all these things. We're desperate to attack. If you see somebody who gets into the self-help arena and they become the guru and the sage on the stage, and they start talking all kinds of weird quantum jargon and weird kind of like, you can do this. that's where we're projecting our desperation for a new soteriological avenue, a salvific avenue to rescue us from where we find ourselves in modernity. And I'm on a subjective tangent. This is my opinion, but I just think that we need to cool our jets a little bit. And the lords of Palo Alto, California, and Silicon Valley, they have way too much power and influence on us right now, and that I wish would stop. And we need to, we never stop when we're progressing, do we? We never stop with technology to analyze and have wise, you know, it's not AW, is it? It's not artificial wisdom. It's just artificial intelligence, which is propositional thinking. And there's so many other ways to think. So I'll stop there. But yeah, there's just a lot that can go wrong. But it would be nice if the and AI also, they call this the alignment problem. And like, so our values are being imported into AI, and do they align with the true, the good, and the beautiful, or pro-social or egalitarian objectives? So I'll stop there.
But then, so you mentioned sentience a couple of times there. So what does
Mhm.
sentience do then? Is it just a cogito ergo somewhere? I think therefore I am, or is there something different that defines sentience to you? Because I think the word sentient is kind of a word that's not. It's not something you can hang your hat on. I understand what the semantics of sentience is, but it's like, oh, how do you describe a car? Well, it's something that transports made to be. It has four wheels and a boot. And sentience, I think, is a lot more difficult and nuanced to explain them. It's like the Socrates paradox. You take off a grain of sand, or you add a grain of sand. At what point is it a mound of sand? At what point
Mhm.
exactly does that sentience come into being?
Mhm. Well, again, on a silicon-based system, you can add all the gates and valves you want, as many ones and zero. You can even bring quantum computing in with qubits, and I will still argue that it is not a sentient system. Now, here's where I'll give a little outlet, a little pressure valve. There's a guy I interviewed, Mike Levin, who works with Josh Bongard. Josh Bongard's at the University of New Hampshire. Both of them are working on chimeric systems. They are silico carbo hybrids, chimeras. And what I would suggest then is, if you can get silicon pseudo-intelligence simulacra to bind with a living system that has the actual capacity to move up into a sentient mode, again, from single simple neurons and cells to something that can complexify out, that the hybrid, the chimera, will probably, hopefully, maybe be able to take the efficiency and the non-filtering of machine learning and blend it with discretion and prudence and the wisdom, proto wisdom or pseudo wisdom or whatever you want to call it, that we want in a system. And so if we are not malignant, and we're not pathological, and we develop that technology of chimeric systems that are, again, living systems hybridized and turned into hybrids with silicon systems, which is working. Look up Josh Bongard and look up Mike Levin right now. They're doing that work. And so in that possible world, that possible future, then I'll shut up and take back everything I just said. But it's not machines, it's not gates and valves, it's not ones and zeros. It is the synthesis, the artifice system of both silicon and carbon systems, living system, because this artificed living system will not be anything that nature dropped off at our feet through evolution and adaptation. It will be something we synthesize, that we artificed ourselves. And it will also be this other silicon system with gates and valves and ones and zeros, that if they come together synergistically, and they then have their own evolutionary trajectory, because machines themselves have had an evolutionary from simple mechanical computers like abacus to any of the calculating machines of the 19th century, up through circuits and wires where we are now. That's an evolutionary history, but again, it is a simulacra. It is just simple processing. It is not the complexity and the richness of what any living system experiences. I would
100%
draw
agree.
yeah, I would draw a definite boundary between a living system and something we created. We artificed the computer. We artificed artificial intelligence. That's why it's called artificial. And it's
Yeah.
not quite intelligent yet. It's just it's feeding back information. It's getting very good and very novel. I don't want to diminish what's been accomplished in machine learning. It is fascinating because they are coming up with novelty. These systems are coming up with answers we couldn't have imagined, right? You were talking about genius earlier. There is genius in it. There is genius in there. Despite us, it is showing us answers to things. So there are chemists and physicists that ask it questions or ask it to aggregate data that we could never do, in a million years, and they come out with novel things, novel ideas. And so again, there goes back to what you were talking about genius earlier. So I'm granting a lot to machine learning, but I also want to not grant that it's going to be our lover, our God, our savior, our psychiatrist. It will assist our lovers, our gods. Yeah, it will be there as a mechanical slave to help us.
Yeah.
But I want to imagine that we shouldn't, because again, what I'm seeing is that we're wishful thinking projection into these systems that, that it's going to either be our devil that destroys us or our God that saves us or our lover that satisfies us or our next guru and sage that's going to solve all of our problems, and we'll live in that sort of equilibrium, the eudaimonia that, or the whatever we want. So anyway,
Okay. So that's on a macro level. So we can kind of agree that to have a position of splitting, as you said, zeros and ones, where you say this is sentient, this is non-sentient, it's quite
mhm.
easy on a macro level. But then when you break it down to a micro level, and this is where quantum physics comes in, could you not argue that every cell is, sentient to a degree? If you look at obviously the particle splits experiment, delayed choice experiment, all of that. So if you say, well, actually, okay, on the macro level, you can see, well, there seems to be a cut-off point, or you can or baskets that you can put sentient and non-sentient into. But then as you go down to the minute level of the universe, and as I said, some of those experiments that people can look up, particle entanglement and things like that, Schrodinger's cat, and all those sorts of things.
Mhm, mhm.
Then is everything not sentient?
Well, this gets into panpsychism and consciousness as a primitive. I partially align with that. I would be very, very cautious to what I would do is rather than saying conscious or sentient, I would just say that what might not be terribly controversial is that what we call the physical universe that's above the quantum, that is actuality or discrete materiality, is self-organizing. It is coalescing constantly or reforming through nuclear fission or whatever's going on, that there is a constancy of movement and progress, if you will, in a adaptation and evolutionary sense. Like, so if there was any kind of big bang or bounce or whatever's going on, if there was some, like dawn, some moment of singularity moving into diversity or unitarity, as from a single to multiple units, trying to be simple with the terms, that there is a traceable intelligence, if you will, or intelligencing in it that we can see as intelligent, especially because what brought us to where we are, all of those billions of years of things becoming things and things changing and the forces of nature, however many forces we have moving things around and things doing things. I would say that it's not a kind of intelligence like the watchmaker argument or any of that kind of stuff. It's more that as things complexify, as things aggregate into systems rather than carbon, hydrogen, I think that we see it becomes more palpable, it becomes more discernible, more relevant to us. Again, relevance realization. So I'm trying to dance very delicately from saying that a carbon atom is intelligent and has consciousness to saying that when enough atoms and molecules get together, this isn't controversial that you and I are having an intelligent well, it may be subjective, but we're having
Yeah.
a conversation that requires some modicum of intelligence, right? We'll just say that to be not controversial. So, yeah, it's on a continuum, like we've said a couple of times. And so I would say that yes, but you're right, big caution, big asterisks, that I'm not going to, and panpsychists are comfortable with this. They'll say, yes, a carbon atom is discretely aware or whatever. But I wouldn't I wouldn't go that far. I would say that the carbon atom is part of you cannot separate the carbon atom from everything else. It goes back to what I was saying, and this is very kind of Eastern philosophy, but it's more that nothing is separate, nothing is distinct. It's all unitary. It's all, like the hippies say, it's all one, man. It's that if we keep that kind of thinking in mind, that we know that everything is more or less connected, every more or less has a history with itself. Like I have a history with certain, I broke off certain branches of the phylogenetic tree, sorry, where species, radiate out. And so we radiated out from primates. Primates radiated out from these, whatever those marsupial type or wherever the hell we came from. I forget, there was some creature that we branched off with, like, I don't know, having 6 million years ago or whatever. But anyway, blah, 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 the chain. I'd say that's on a continuum. And even like, I always love to think about abiogenesis, like when life started on this planet, nothing special happened. It's just life, how warm vent or lipid pools, whatever your theory is, that chemicals came together and chemicals were organizing, and the conditions were right, the attractor states were right, the canalization was right, and it allowed for complexification of things to then become cooperative in a sense, just because that's what the conditions were affording, and that after a while, you got these prokaryotic cells, and woo, then you get algae or whatever the first life forms were. So it's always on a continuum. So I can't say it's like your sand pile thing or ship of Theseus thing. It's like,
Yeah,
when
ship of
does one
Theseum is
thing not
crazy,
be?
isn't it?
Yeah, well, and I love ship of Theseus because here's an interesting argument I just thought of
That's so
yesterday.
good.
I have mango trees in my yard. And so the ship of Theseus, to break it down really quickly, is if you take a board off the ship of Theseus, you keep replacing the boards and the constituency of the boat. Is it still the ship of Theseus 30 years later when everything's been replaced? I would say ostensibly yes, because somebody branded that name to it. It's arbitrary. It doesn't really mean anything. It's
No,
just
but
a it's a it's
just
an item.
just one thing on that
Oh, go
though. So
ahead.
the ship of Theseus is like, well, so let's say you've got the ship, as you said, you take off one piece, you replace it with another
Yeah.
piece, you take off one piece to replace it with another piece, and then the pieces that you've got, you rebuild the ship. So there's two ships. One is the one that's
Mhm.
been replaced by all of the parts, and one is you took in the old parts and rebuilt it. Which is the real
Mhm.
ship? Which is the original? Like, which is the ship of Theseus?
The first one is still ship of Theseus 1. The other one is ship of Theseus 2. You just deconstructed it. So
Yeah.
when it's in its elemental, when it's in the boatyard, it's a pile of wood. And you still have this thing that was the ship of Theseus, but what did you do or not do to change the name? Again, it's arbitrary, right? It's just an assignment of a semiotic value to something, right? But the constituency itself is wood, wood. There's nothing. It's arbitrary that we called it the ship of Theseus in the first place. We attach that semiotic value to it, right? That's where Charles Sanders Peirce comes in. There's Caesarean semiotics, which is the sign in the signifier, but Peirce had the audacity to say, well, there's the interpretant too. And I'm sorry to bring that cheesiness up, but it's like the interpretant is the value creator for the name, the ship of Theseus. Everything else is wood. If a crow is sitting there watching us do all this stuff, the crow's going to be, if they could think this way, they'd say wood, 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 wood. And we're in there going Theseus 1 or Theseus 1 1 simulacra, or, where are we with all this? But again, it comes down to this arbitrary nature of the interpretant assigning a value to something to say this, burning the word Theseus onto the ship. So,
Yes, it's the
and,
whole
and this could
meaning
all
thing, isn't it?
hinge, this could all fall apart if the word Theseus was on that pile of wood that you just took the Theseus apart and put it on, right? So maybe that's the thing that hinges everything together. But as far as the whole argument of the ship of Theseus, I'd say that it is going to continue to be Theseus no matter what you do until you decide it's not Theseus anymore. So it's in other words, it's poking a little bit at the weakness of the metaphor, and it's not so much because you do get the spirit of the argument. It's like if I put another person's arm on my arm and then I put another eyeball. And as I was going to say about my mango tree, I have a mango tree in my yard. I'm top working a few of them. It was the variety was called Lancetilla. I've cut the Lancetilla down. It's to a trunk, and there's new sprouts coming out. I'm grafting new varieties onto those sprouts. So the meristem will be Lancetilla by way of its original configuration. But then I'm going to have Palmer and Namdok Mai and Cac and all these other weird cultivars of mango on there. So is it Lancetilla, or is it a combination of Palmer and Namdok Mai, or whatever the hell I stuck on there with the names? But right, it's just a mango tree. It's Mangifera indica. Still, at the end of the day, it's a Mangifera indica. We just arbitrarily assign something because this flavor profile is this and this. So anyway, blah blah blah. I'm sorry if I'm laboring
No,
things
but
too
do,
much,
do,
man.
do we go to, and it's an interesting point because do we go too far? for meanings, like I said earlier today, I believe I'm more deistic or probably panendeistic. You mentioned obviously
Hmm.
panpsychism as well, where I think that obviously
Right.
the quantum physics sort of underlies with that to an extent that with obviously for people who don't know, obviously the particle slips experiment delayed choice, basically shows an element of consciousness with particles essentially. So that sort of fits in with my narrative. Now, where I was going with this was that do we just want, and the reason I said that is because, we inherently want to find meaning with as human beings. We need to fit us. I'm this supporter.
Right.
I'm, this race from this place. We want to sort of give ourselves labels, like you said with the ship of Theseus. It's one and two. For everyone else, it's just wood. And again, but
Yeah.
does that then break down to your level of knowledge? Because for a crow, you mentioned, they only know this certain level of knowledge where it's like, okay, wood, brick, element, this element. Whereas the
Hmm.
higher you get up in that spectrum, and you can start to differentiate more and more and more, you can break stuff down. Like as you read about science, you can start to
Hmm.
break things down into smaller and smaller subcategories, and you say, well, actually, this is not the same as that. Whereas for people very basic in maths, it's like add times is different,
Hmm. Hmm.
plus is different, minus is different. But as you progress, the level of differentiation that you have becomes an exponentially larger pool of buckets that you can then place your ideas within. Do you think that's a problem though in some respects? Although there is a good thing that you can separate stuff out, does that become an inherent problem where we sort of over analyze and it's paralysis by analysis sort of situation where we're always trying to find meaning and connections that can somehow take away the joy of existence as well to an extent?
Yeah. And that's exactly what reductive physicalists have done. When you were talking, I was thinking of an argument that comes up in reductive physicalism, which is what gives us this kind of hard problem of consciousness and all these other, paradoxes that we run into. But there are people who are not necessarily revered in the academic community, but they're called non-reductive physicalists, and they require a supervening eminence in also the emergence that they grant the physicalist that is the reductive. Because what happens with the reductive physical is they take everything apart and they're like, there's nothing here. We're in those weird, spooky action things of quantum physics, and it's a hot mess. And get back to us. We're going to write a promissory note. We know what's going on. Just give us a little bit. We'll solve the problem. All right, which is an insoluble problem for our capacity. There may be some mind out on another planet that's got it all figured out, laughing at us like we're the trailer park of the universe or something. But what I would say is that there are people who are trying to bring a little hope into throwing a lifeline to having discrete physicality, discrete packets of materiality, but by saying that it is not that physical, which is a metaphysics, it's not science, it's a metaphysics. Okay, so we have to grant ourselves some speculation here is to say that you can't reduce everything down because when you take something apart like this body, then yeah, there's no consciousness, there's no sentience or agency or Elan Vital or whatever's going on. Elan Vital expressing through me. But when we allow a supervening force of eminence, which is to grant panentheism, so I'm doing that and not the reductive physical. I'm saying panentheism might afford us that to say that there is a supervening intelligence-nessing, however you want to say that, uh, that dances with. And again, this is where Whitehead was a process relational. That's what I love about Whitehead. He tries to solve. He's a mathematician. He tries to solve a lot of this. He's trying to be very elegant about this. And he's not a non-reductive physicalist, but he is a process relational metaphysics person, which again grants this. I don't know if it's quite supervening. So to say something emanating from above and then reductive materiality from underneath in eminence, so that you get this dance, this union of coalescing and creation, and that's where I might. And I'm open to panentheism. Again, I said I'm an agnostic non-theist, but I can be agnostic and say, yeah, panentheism is a nice thing. It's better than saying that there's a sky father that does these kind of things for us. So it's granting more power to God, to me, to do that, rather than saying that, God is an anthropomorphic system that gets a little cranky and can be a little bipolar sometimes. It's that creation is so far more complex than an angry guy, or a happy guy, depending on the covenants and whatnot.
Yeah,
So
100%. And I think with that, it's again, it's down to as you said, what your viewpoint is. Are the confirmation bias? Do you shoehorn ideas that you or information you've
Yeah.
had to then conform to that because that's your belief system, or are you more open-minded with regards to your ideas, etc., you know?
Yeah, yeah. And that's where I love taking this obnoxious position of being agnostic about a lot of things because I think there's an insoluble nature to some of these bigger questions that we ask. And we either lack the capacity to understand or it is so obfuscated from us that even if we threw a third cortical fold in there, we had better processing speed or our quantum computing, in 40 years, our quantum computing AI, blah, 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 whatever we come up with can do super, I was reading something the other day that like a good working quantum system that's not committing too many errors that we can contain it and get it to function for us could do computational processing that would take, I forget, it was like 10 to like 19 years for a binary system to solve problems. So it's going to open things up, and I could be wrong. Somebody can correct that for me. But it's staggering how much more the quantum the qubit system that if we can actually get it to work could afford us in terms of
That's like the
processing
passwords,
information.
isn't it? It's like a normal computer would take like
Yeah, it breaks
100 million years
cryptos.
or something, and then that's do it in like
Yeah,
half an hour because it's doing all of the possibilities at once, and that's why
yeah.
people say we could be living in a simulation with all the universes going at once, with all the possibilities, because that's how quantum
Oh,
physics
yeah,
is in delayed
multiverse. Yeah,
choice.
yeah.
It's basically saying that all of the possibilities are there all at once.
hmm
It's actually crazy to think about, but. So then, obviously, if you think about quantum physics in that respect, where all of those possible scenarios could exist at once,
hmm
then if you think about this as well, then so if that's the case, all of these possibilities could exist at once, and all the possible universes are happening at the same time, and your decisions sort of course correct to as to which of those options happen. It's like the whole thing in quantum physics where until you measure it, like the Schrodinger's cat, Schrodinger's box. Is that could that be extrapolated to time as well? So if you think of time, we currently think of time as being on a cassette player or VCR basis, where in order to get to the right song, you have to either fast forward past everything or
hmm
rewind
hmm
back
hmm
towards a particular song. Is there a potential that it could, in fact, and this is obviously not something you can prove, it's more of a philosophical experiment as to an extent. Is there a chance that it could be more like a CD or record player where you can skip songs and jump back and forth to different songs, and within the multiple of universes that quantum physics is potentially saying that exist, could that be the same with time as well?
Given the constraints of the what we understand about the forces of nature, the weak and strong nuclear force and those things, I would say that theoretically there may be some means for uh see when we are substrates, we are substances and so to to freely navigate that kind of potential, I think would not be possible. But again, in the quantum perspective, wherein there is no rules that we abide by necessarily, and I think isn't that where they're struggling with gravity right now? They're trying to find like loop quantum gravity and trying to reconcile how that fits into quantum physics and also time. I mean, is time a factor? Is it part of what happens at a quantum level? I don't know. This I'm totally ignorant. I don't know. But in speaking to all potential actualizing and coalescing, which speaks to Everett's many worlds kind of interpretation to get us out of what was it, the Copenhagen, I think, or one of the interpretations that produced that paradox. Like, how does that decoherence, uh, couple us to this physical system, this physical you know, I could do this or I could do this kind of thing, like where does other potential go when something collapses down into this reality? And I don't, so this is one of those I don't know moments where I don't know enough about the relationship between the spookiness of quantum stuff to where we are at the relativistic level, the macro scale, as you say, which I totally agree. I, we haven't built that bridge yet. And I also think it's because of our interpretation of the macro level. is there's something missing there too. It's not that there's something going on down here that we can discover. It's more that we maybe have to retro or rethink or re-engineer our perspective on how things actualize and how reality manifests and collapses and all those kind of things. So it could be that there is a solution waiting by the right genius that comes along and susses this out. You know, hopefully they show up and
Yeah, because it's
yeah, they
again,
can do that. But
yeah. I mean, I've mentioned it a couple of times, and it wasn't a conscious thing to mention the Socrates paradox again. But again, there's that point is where does that spooky behavior here stop and become
mhm,
predictable at the macro? Where that cutoff point between micro and macro? And it's really interesting. And again, this is why these conversations are great from a philosophical and rational
mhm.
thought experiment standpoint. In terms of it's not the what was that thought experiment about the room where she read about the color red.
Oh, Mary's room. Yeah, she
Mary's room,
couldn't
that's
see
Mary's
red.
room.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's crazy because only unless you understand that thought experiment or think about these thought experiments in that way can you really conceptualize ideas and go through the potential outcomes or uh, results or conclusions that would happen from those thought experiments. It's like the example of the tape and the
Hmm.
CD I gave
Hmm.
the time, unless you conceptualize it into something like that, it's very difficult to argue, oh, well, we can't go back in time because of this. But if you use a physical example, it's much easier to sort of understand. And this is why philosophy is so great. So you sound, and from what you said so far, and obviously our conversations last week as well, you seem to be very an avid reader of philosophical ideas. A few things you mentioned today as well that I didn't know, which is great. And I'm not saying that I'm a sort of a philosophical expert. I don't think that's the whole point in philosophy, isn't it?
No,
Socrates says,
no.
you don't know anything really. So, but what
Yeah,
is your
exactly.
what is your favorite part of philosophy? Whether it is a thought experiment, whether it is an idea, whether it is a school, whether it was an individual within philosophy, what was your favorite that really either that interests you because you don't have to agree with something for it to interest you. Like I love stuff about quantum physics, time travel, and stuff like that. It doesn't mean that I am hugely knowledgeable about it. I just like it. Or is it
Yeah.
something that aligns with your interests? So let's say you are a panentheistic
Hmm.
individual, you might like that because it aligns with your viewpoint. So I just want to get your opinion on what it is in philosophy that you really enjoy, or is it just the breadth of um, sort of cognitive poking essentially of yourself to
Yeah.
think in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate you asking, like, there's a diversity to why I would enjoy that. So thank you for putting it that way. I appreciate that because I think that's necessary, that it doesn't necessarily satiate or satisfy some big question. It's more that again, I use the dancing metaphor. Like I'm in flow with some things when I look at things, and so as is probably obvious to people who really do know philosophy, I self-taught, street level, general audience, but I love it. So I'm at my level, and afford me that charity when I speak to this stuff. But it's what the passion that arises in me when I listen to people, my fellow human beings, whether they lived 350 BC or they're alive today. It is, I think, I want to find a thread in the human social evolutionary scale. And so I go back to I like the pre-Socratics. So Anaximander was talking about the nous, or he had a word for sort of the ineffable, the pan. He was seeking the one, that Plato then called, the logos or the one. And I also like Pyrrho of Elis and Sextus Empiricus back then in the pre-Socratic period, because I think it was Pyrrho that went with Alexander the Great to the Hindu Kush and up into northern India, in Afghanistan and the Hindu Kush, and then up in northern. Pyrrho met the Gymnosophists, who were sort of early Buddhists, and they were skeptics, and so they kind of impressed upon Pyrrho that, like you just said with Socrates, who I believe was in. I see again. This is where I get into lineage. Was impressed with this. You can't know. This kind of weak skepticism to say, obviously knowledge is possible, right? You know better than to walk in front of a dump truck doing 60 miles an hour, but there's other knows that we can't true, it's insoluble, right? But Pyrrho brought that back to Greece, and it changed things because he argued with him and Sextus Empiricus and the Pyrrhonian skepticism argued with the other academies, the dogmatists, the cynics, other people in the academies and the Stoa that would get together and blah, 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 and just argue all day long for the fun of it. But bringing in that skepticism, bringing in that epoche rather, which their tagline was epoche leads to ataraxia. Ataraxia, sorry, I'm tripping on my words now. Ataraxia, which is eudaimonia, right? And so the fact that we suspend judgment in order to feel a sense of well-being, I think is good medicine, especially in our times, especially when we're talking about machine learning, because again, it's just a particular type of intelligence. And I don't want to get back into AI when I'm on my little rant here, but it's like, where is the prudence and the sophrosine and the caution and all those things? And that's where epoche is good medicine. And then to take all of that into modernity, I like the German idealists who were retrieving ideas from the Advaita Vedanta and mixing it into this post-enlightenment or just recently post-enlightenment schism of rationality and religion and what they considered irrational. And they were trying to do damage control to that. They were bringing in Eastern ideas into Western sort of 19th century philosophy that was, again, more about the epistemic and knowing and propositional truth and things like that. So they were tempering that with a little bit of bringing humanity back into it, bringing the hard work of, thousands of people over thousands of years to bring us to a place. And then I love to go into the sort of modern era in the mid 20th century, and you mentioned Sartre earlier, and the French existentialists, and also more modern people like Deleuze and Guattari, and I mentioned Charles Sanders Peirce, and they're working with these old systems. It shows up in their work. Like Deleuze and Guattari were talking about the rhizome, which is a very Buddhist idea. There's a rhizomatic connection with everything, and machinic assemblages, and the diagrammatic machinic assemblage, which goes out to, like, again, Platonic, a potential kind of thing, like, things that there are tractor states, which so Plato was very specific about, like, the forms. There was a form of the tree, the form of the apple, the form of the mountain. But if we could play with that and get creative and be more fluid with it, and it's what Whitehead talked about, his eternal objects, that they are potentia that can be called upon to be actualized and reified. So that speaks to and Whitehead was very concerned because he was in the middle of that period where quantum conversations were happening. He would have conversations with these people because, again, he's a mathematician. So again, Deleuze and Guattari were talking about the rhizomatic thing, the machinic assemblages, which a machine is a metaphor for any system that's interacting. Right. So it's unitarity, again, expressed as like an Idra's net kind of thing where it's systemicity. And then they also, another triadic system that I like that Deleuze and Guattari talk about is territorialization, deterritorialization, reterritorialization, and then back up to here, which is a really big kind of thinky way of saying that if I grab a stick off the ground that was a stick a moment ago, now this stick is something that I can use to poke a piece of fruit off a tree. Now the stick is a tool. It's been deterritorialized from an inert object on the ground that fell off a tree as a dead thing to being a useful tool. And then I've reterritorialized it after it's been deterritorialized into a utility for me to use. So it's a big way of them saying, yeah, you pick up a stick and I use it, so but they want to be elegant about that and talk about. So again, all of this comes back from the lineage of going back into the pre-Socratics, going back into India and Advaita Vedanta and the Brahma and all these wonderful things, these psychotechnologies that just have been with us for so long. And reciprocity was afforded by the Silk Road and Persia. There was so much going on in Persia with the meeting of Islamic philosophers and Western Greek philosophers and early Christian, getting together and having these salons and these conversations. That to me is the jazz of life, and seeing the lineage and the phylogenetic carrying on to bring us where we are now, whether it's being employed outside of esoteric circles and small groups of people just going on endlessly about it. I don't know how that translates into helping humanity more broadly. It doesn't. I don't know how it bleeds into pop culture. That's a thing I don't know about, which is probably why I do my show, because if I can get one or two ears to listen to some of this stuff, and it's not about me, it's about I'm bringing something forward for you to consider, and go talk to an expert about it, because I'm not. I'm just a guy that likes this stuff. So anyway, I'll stop there because that's what philosophy does for me. It's like the thoughts and ideas as they get handed from person to person to person, and they work with it. Like people took Immanuel Kant's work and Hegel and Schopenhauer and all these other guys. They just take that work and build stuff from it and break it down and dismiss certain things. So that's what I love about it. It's just the ongoing project from, and that's the extended mind. That is the mind that continues, right? You want to talk about intelligence showing up outside of the mind of the human body, right? That to me, and it's not real. Just like consciousness isn't real or intelligence isn't real. You can't assign an ontic status to consciousness or intelligence. We just have to take for granted that doing calculations or taking in information has a realness to it, but it's not a substrate dependent thing, right? So I'll stop there because I just
Yeah.
dropped a
I mean,
bunch of stuff
it's
down.
good. You've gone on a real good tangent there where so thing for me is with philosophy is as you said, everyone loves it for different reasons. I love it because it's a searcher for what is right, not who is right. But then ironically, it becomes about who is right in the end because who said that thing about what is
Yeah.
right then becomes the situation that you're like, well, I agree with this guy, I agree with Aristotle in this particular way, and I believe in
Hmm.
Heraclitus in a different way. It's really dependent, but that's what's really interesting to me. It's a full circle of well, I'm trying to seek what is right through this particular discourse or um, uh, way of thinking or whatever it may be,
Hmm.
a thought experiment. But then it becomes back to who is right. Because who said that thing about trying to find out the truth of the universe, and
Right.
you made a really interesting point about the thought being eternal because someone thought about it, they wrote it down. Apart from obviously Socrates and stuff like that, but it primarily there through Plato's work, of course.
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting thing because it's actually we're carrying on from someone else's saved game. Someone's you press save on their computer game and you're sort of
Hmm.
carrying on. You've been born and you're carrying on from these thoughts and you can take some of that and build upon it. I did a podcast episode, so obviously for the listeners will probably know this that I do guest episodes such as this, but I also do individual episodes to explore ideas for my
Right.
own learning as much as anything else. And I coined the term the Sony Earth Station
Hmm.
where obviously like a GTA game, you go onto there and you're a character and you build your own level. The interesting thing about Earth is that if you leave a lasting legacy, some of these philosophers or the guy who invented the telephone, the wheel, etc., have improved the game for future players when they come onto the game. And that's what's happened with philosophy as well, was that you're coming into the game having had all these thinkers that have come up with these ideas, and you can take that and, as you said, apply your own logic and intuition onto it and come up with something new. And that's, I think, a fantastic thing about philosophy as well. You've got the whole timeline, again, as you mentioned, from the pre-Socratics to Socratic Hellenistic periods, etc., and into obviously modern
Hmm.
day enlightenments and all that. And it's great to be able to see the change of the tide, from the rationalist, empiricist, etc., and taking parts of each and having your own viewpoint on say, well, I agree with this particular point here. I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's fine. Even within a philosopher, you might agree with certain bits, or some bits have been disproved actually, but then other
Hmm.
parts sort of become uh, eternal, with regards
Yeah.
to their work. So I think that's a really interesting part about philosophy as well. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but
Yeah. No, I'm with you 100% on what you said. And one bit of salve that I might put into the contestable nature of philosophy is that if there are two persons, two interlocutors that get engaged in a discussion about something, you mentioned this, so the potential for the argumentation to sort of refute and maybe dismiss or disconfirm or anything that's going on, that's good. But also, when two people go into dialogue with with regard to the works of others, and they're using that for a kind of exploring territory, I think that opens up into what they call the dialectic, which is non-rhetorical examination of a matter. Could be a truth, could be a postulate, something. They two or more persons enter into this. We'll say two. This dialectic, and dialectic is seeking the outcome for the benefit of the matter. of the subject of the proposition, the postulate, the theory, whatever. Not for the sake that one person sort of dominates the conversation by saying, well, I'm going to convince you, which is rhetoric, that you may be off a little on this, or that this person may have been off historically. And so I follow a guy who does cogsci out of the University of Toronto, and he has a further step that you take, that when two people enter into a dialectic, for the sake and the love of the matter that's being discussed, so that it may benefit and it may grow, by way of those earlier people who showed up, who had to hit pause on play because they died, and then you're picking up the game, that enters into dialogos, that the space, that, so this is in the Bible, like the thirdness comes in, and that these two interlocutors are creating that space for the divine, the logos, whatever you want to call it, to enter into the conversation, so that the matter is even more amplified, and that the potential, but the aperture opening, the potential arises, in that conversation becomes spirited in a sense. And that's where I love to explore the sacred and the divine. It is, and it is not that I'm saying that some little force drops in. It's that the spirit of the two persons involved, plus the spirit of all those that came before them, they're in good faith with each other, and they want to create that space, and they want it to be sacred space, and that it could be anything. You could be talking about whatever, but that opens up. So dialogos, entering into the dialectic, which was a dialogue to begin with, but then it evolves into a dialectic because both persons agree, I'm entering into good faith. I don't want to own you. I don't want to best you. I want the subject being discussed to be improved, and to be benefit from our endeavor. And then dialogos rather enriches that, because it's the flow state. It's the opening up to novel experience, to the imaginal, that can inject something into that was not thought of before. Kind of like the machine learning systems will give you an output, and the people who are laboring over this idea are like, oh my God, novelty, boop, insight, and then they go with that. So anyway, so
So
that's my accentuating what you just said.
yeah. So is there anything in philosophy that you've been reading lately that, so obviously you'll go through periods of reading about X and Y and Z. Is there anything that you've been reading recently that really interested you? Or if that's not the case, what's your sort of favorite thought experiment that blows your mind, or is something that you think will open people's eyes to a whole new way of thinking?
Well, I think for insight to occur, which was again maybe one of the byproducts of the dialogos arriving in the dialectic with the two or more people involved in discussing an idea. I think that also we must explore the pathos. We must explore some of the things that get in the way of that good faith. And one of the things that I've been watching lately, because I am concerned for modern Western civilization right now, is seeing how things get in the way of our ability to create that sacred space with each other, and go into something with the spirit of not me, not you, but the furthering of that which is, I'll use Plato, true, good, and beautiful. If those are our starting points, the true, the good, and the beautiful, which is what Christianity co-opted to the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit kind of thing. And so if we have that in mind, but we don't want to bring our shadow projection into it, we don't want to bring the darkness into that, because that could get in the way. It's just it's a blockage. And so I also, as much as I enjoy the heady, almost euphoric kind of revelations that come from people's ideas, and things that we speak about when we talk about the sacred, whether it's the mystics of, I love the mystics of the 12th century, or 13th century rather, like the Sufic, Ibn Arabi, or Marguerite Porret, who were informed by Neoplatonism, who were just coming up with these beautiful ideas of elegant poetic ideas about how humans can live well and flourish, not in a hedonic sense, but just in a heart-based, despite whatever's going on in life, you're living well, your heart is good. Is in examining some of the shadow, looking at what we've wrought so far in let's just say modern times. That's something else I'm interested in exploring. So I'll cite an example, and then I'll stop. Like recently, in the last year or so, Mark Fisher's come up, and he's the guy about my age who was doing. He's from the UK, and he was talking about taking Jacques Derrida's hauntology, which was a critique of the disillusionment of what They thought this post-Marxist world might be with social democracy. It's a very kind of cultural political idea, but Derrida was playing with words, and it was ontology and the haunting. And so the miscarrying of a promised future, of the enthusiasm and the prosperity models that were coming out of what would come from the 50s post-war Europe and the United States, that really didn't coalesce. And so that's the hauntology. It's the miscarried future. But Fisher took that a step further for more modern times and younger generations who are returning to nostalgia because there is a miscarried future for them. They're not seeing the enthusiasm, whether it's techno enthusiasm or prosperity enthusiasm through a egalitarian market system, whatever you want to call it, so that younger people, let's say under 40, are finding solace in the 80s, whether it's 16-bit funny graphic things, or the neon aesthetic of the Miami Vice kind of thing, synthwave music, so aesthetics, arts are nostalgic right now for a particular segment and of the generation, and they didn't live that experience, but they look to that as a place of solace, of comfort, because there is nothing in the future that looks really bright right now. And I agree with them. There isn't much that we can see on the horizon in the way of the same kind of promise that was being bantied about in the 50s and the 60s. To say that the future, will be flying cars and everything will be convenient. And some of that did come to fruition, but there's a Malachian dilemma that comes with all of that, which is what artificial general intelligence is doing right now. It has a Malachian price to be paid for that. So
But
I like exploring that to say, how do we future make? How do we future create without falling into nostalgia, which nostalgia is very dangerous. And so is solastalgia. Albrecht out of Australia comes up with this idea called solastalgia, which means to be suffering within your own home, or to be displaced and unhomed within your own home, which I think is also happening for people on multiple ontological levels. I'll stop there because there's a whole lot of
the
stuff.
thing is, I think with that, so you basically mentioned society and your and the issue with society, if that makes sense, and you're worried about it is one of the things that you said earlier on in that
Mhm.
sort of that discourse. Because people get offended too easily nowadays. I think the problem is that you used to be able to have discourse with people, and you disagree, you have a bit of an argument, and it would be like, we'll shake hands and we'll sort of move on from there. Problem now is people are getting so offended because they're woke left or they're hard right, and they're arguing with each other, and then it's the hateful thing. And obviously you've seen the Charlie Kirk
Mhm.
situation, and some people celebrating that he died, other people saying, well, we need to we need to get rid of the woke left because they're the issue. Is it because
Right.
society now is so uneducated? Maybe they do need to look at the ethics side, because obviously we've talked mostly about metaphysics and epistemology, I probably suppose, over the course of this. Whereas if they were to look at an ethical perspective and look at the golden mean, for example, in terms of where they are, in terms of their viewpoints, I see society now on the either end, too little or too much of each of those virtues, essentially, in terms of Aristotle. What's your sort of viewpoint on that, and whether or not that's affecting the state of society today?
Okay, so I'll issue an opinion alert to the audience and say this is just my opinion, and I try to stay neutral when it comes to cultural or political divides and dichotomies and things like that. What I would suggest is that in modernity, with the emergence and presence of social media, which is a platform for which we can find ourselves being divisive and separated, I will say that the forces of social media, uh it's not explicit, but implicitly we are being kept in a stasis. To go Jungian for a second, there's the pre-personal, there's the infant before the Lacanian mirror stage up to 3 years that thinks it's the universe. A child prior to seeing itself as distinct is the universe. And so then, I'm being dramatic here, but it is everything. It is can't distinguish itself. But then they get into that personal stage where they realize in the mirror they see themselves and they, oh my God, I'm me. That's that stage of development up into the late teens, early 20s, where it's the personal. It is the me. It is I have needs and they need to be satisfied. And I'm not so much worried about others. Now, there's obviously we have to qualify a lot of this, but that speaks more to the personal stage of development. Then there is the interpersonal stage of development. That is the societal relationship that one has, that one recognizes the presence of another in the world, and that one realizes that we are more or less, better or worse, interdependent. There is no such thing as individualism. You can bring me the strongest individualist in the world, and they will tell me how individualistic they are. But I will say that nothing you have done in your life was wrought or informed by yourself. You have had influence from the outside from day one. You are interdependent. You are part of a system. Now, you can, forge an identity of autonomy. That's fine. If that's your personality, if that's how you want to wear yourself in public. But, don't give me that strong metaphysical, individual uh, ideology. So saying all that, and it's a little bit polemic, but I would say all of that to point out that when we argue with each other, when we get into these false dichotomies, you're this, they're that, we're this, they're that, is that we haven't moved into the interpersonal arena of individuation that Jung speaks to. And Jung's individuation is beyond just individuating out from, again, the three-year-old becoming an individual. It is that the fully formed individuated person is dynamic and interpersonal aware. So they have this self-awareness, and some people would call this emotional intelligence. Some people would call it pro-social tendencies. Is that they recognize the other and they recognize the value in another. That it's hard for them to dehumanize another. That there is a firewalling or a safeguarding that goes on, and it is a pro-social nature that we may have within us. I'd say that that's been hijacked and manipulated by implicitly or explicitly for whatever purposes and ends that are sought in our gathering together in the commons of social media, which affords us a safety and a separation that I don't have to be directly responsible for the harm I cause you because I troll you. I say something really vicious about you. I call you a lefty woke, blah, 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 or a right-wing fascist or, any of that hyperbole. We're insulated from the impact, the affective impact that we have on the other. And that's not being in the interpersonal state. That's being in a personal state. Again, I'll bring up narcissism again, because that's being encouraged in TikTok and Instagram and Twitter and all these other things, or X, Twixter, whatever it is now. And so that breeds a kind of pathos. I was talking about the pathos earlier. How do we clear the way out to enter into proper dialectic, to enter into good faith dialogue? Right? That's been hijacked, and so there's something called opponent processing, which happens in cognitive process. There's an opponent. We have to weight things, and good governance of a society is opponent processing. You have the left and the right, and they get together and they compromise and they make deals, and something comes out of it. Well, now it's adversarial processing, whether it's a governmental system, a polity, or it's the culture at large, humanity. A lot of us in the West are in this mode of adversarial processing. We've ensconced ourselves, siloed ourselves, and never shall we bridge to find the dialectic, to find the union of the opposite, and finding a synthesis project. The Hegelian, thesis, antithesis, cliche, and so that's what's lacking right now. I believe is that we're not exercising that physical or virtual muscle or mental muscle to understand the other, to not be triggered by somebody else's thoughts. So anyway, I'll stop with that. But I think that could speak to what might be happening that's causing us to be so much in discord and disharmony and dysregulation and all these things. It's that but whether intentional or otherwise, that putting us all on a virtual platform together where we're insulated from the harm that we may cause, or even the parasocial relationship, that the genuine nature of a good affectionate bond is still a simulacra. It's not real. I have good friends that I've never met in person online, and I have relationships with them, and we get along, and we talk, and but it's not a physical like connectedness. And maybe there's goodness in that, and maybe there's problems with that. I don't know.
Yeah, I
The
mean,
parasocial.
obviously, especially on the West, it's more of an individual society, egoist,
Right.
which can have its benefits in terms of, if you just focus on yourself, actually, you can actually improve society on the whole because you become the best version of yourself, and you then look after your family, who then they do better, and the street then does better, and your city does better. So there is an argument for that as well. But I think on an individual basis, if you then become selfish, it's sort of a bit like Alan Watts said. He said that the bees and flowers, are they the same thing? Because you said about codependency and existing together
Mm.
earlier on in your sort of answer there. And is that the case where the bee is the flower? Because neither can sort of exist without each other. And people need to learn that there we have a coexistence between us. And I think society sort of lost that. We don't have the same level of empathy and care about each other. And as you said about the discourse a number of times as well, we don't really care the fact that it's about us being right. You know, we talked about
Yeah,
what is right versus who is right. People have a I'm right, I'm right, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm right, you're
right.
wrong, you're stupid, you're retarded. You know, you said about the fascist right and woke left, that's sort of extremes as they call each other, isn't it really?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think people need to understand, okay, you have a different opinion. Let's walk through why I think I'm right. And coming back to Charlie Kirk, you know, that's one of the things that he did where he said, look, you get a mic, argue the point, you know, we can shake hands afterwards. I'm going to show you with my uh, um, my viewpoint, my set of information, my facts, my figures, my own Charlie Kirk matrix as to why I think you're wrong. And that's the beautiful thing about discourse. But unfortunately, and we can go into who killed him if you want, whatever. You know, that's a good its own little subsection. I'm not going to go into that on in this episode, but you know, he was killed, and that was primarily for his views.
Well, I think let me pull away from Charlie Kirk, but that type of cultural engagement more broadly could be anybody. You mentioned Kirk. I'll just say broadly, people who engage this way. Um, his technique was rhetorical. He was very well prepared and well equipped with talking points, rhetorical talking points, and he was going up against 19-year-olds who have, uh, something 101, and they're undergrads, they're just ill-equipped to argue. And so it was asymmetrical argumentation, and it's great showmanship. It's great for entertainment. But if and Charlie Kirk did engage with good interlocutors, and it became a different playing field, and it wasn't so much like prove me wrong type stuff. So we have to be careful with that. But what I would say is that's not good faith dialectic. That is not arriving at a conclusion. So the Kirks of the world, the people left or right that had agendas, and the left does this too, is that they're dead set on something and they want to. That's the point of rhetorical argumentation is to persuade and to convince and to bring you either off your guard in your position or to win you over, right? And it's rarely that anybody gets won over, but it's to knock somebody off their guard. That's not good faith argumentation. And so somebody who uses that virtual utility of argumentation, what ends do they seek? Is it just to gratify the agenda and the camp? And again, this could be left or right; it doesn't matter. But what ends do they seek? Is it to unify and synthesize? Is to create kumbaya and people getting along, or is it to sort of say that, see, I'm right, see, I'm right, see, everything I believe in is right? And again, it could be some lefty or it could be some person on the right. But I think that's the opposite of dialectic. It is rhetorical argumentation, and it achieves very little, except for the satisfaction, the personal gratification of whomever wins the argument or whomever walks away the victor. And again, I'm not pointing this at Charlie Kirk. I'm just saying broadly that is a style of argumentation. It is a style of engagement socially and culturally that yields very little. It's not a synthesis project. It doesn't go back to what I was saying a moment ago with the dialectic, where two people sit down in good faith with the best of intentions of not winning an argument, of not being the better or the winner or the this or the loser or the dominator. It is that they care enough about the matter being discussed that they're willing to set aside some of their egoic, self-gratifying tendencies and potential to further the issue. So, and then to go to individualism for just a second, yes, I agree with you that it is the charge, our task to, as individuals, to be the best and to be whatever optimal expression of ourselves that we can be. But also, and two things can be true at the same time, which is again that union of opposites, is that when one optimizes oneself, that one can then look out into the commons, into the social sphere, the ecology of people and minds and all these kind of things, and say, what can I do? What can I do to help? How can I be a helpful person? How can I take this wonderful thing that I've achieved and I'll be a little selfish. This is mine, but to what measure? And this is all incumbent upon how you want to channel yourself. But how can I contribute and build better commons, a better society, without the coercion of a state or any influence from incentivizing from financial gain or anything like, so that might be a question for people, is to say, well, I've optimized myself and I'm doing great. Now, how can I give a little bit? And you see, it's called noblesse oblige, and the people who really make it, the billionaires of the world, Warren Buffett and Gates, and yes, you can trash Gates, but they're giving away money, they're trying to find things, and yes, I realize Gates controversy, whatever, but that's the idea of the noblesse oblige. They get so wealthy that they're like, I'm never going to spend $30 billion, so here, $10 billion, and Buffett's doing that. He's given his money to various organizations and stuff like that. And the only reason I bring Gates in is Buffett's working with that guy, and so please don't attack me because I brought his name up, but which speaks, it helps point out the fact that we have to have
Yeah,
civil conversation.
exactly.
I don't support Bill Gates, so stop.
Yeah,
I don't care
exactly.
about the guy. He's a
Yeah,
creep. Okay,
and
whatever.
it's and
Yeah,
it's
but
it's strange we've got to a place now as well where we need to caveat like what you've just done there. You caveat the
yeah.
fact that that's the case where we shouldn't have to do that, but unfortunately, because of the way that society is now, um, it's it's you sort of have to do that. And the problem is as well, um, is that people don't understand people change. You might have said something
Mm,
10 years ago and you
mm.
and you changed your mind on it now. They thought that the Atomus uncuttable, that was displayed as the smallest particle, but then obviously they found quarks and the like. So you can say something that you maybe had agreed with at 15 years old. Unfortunately, now you don't. And because everything is recorded online, whether it's as you said, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, maybe you've changed your mind, but you will still be dragged through the graveyard for something that you said,
Oh yeah.
10 years ago, which is such a bad a bad society trait, and I think that that is going to cause some concern over the coming years. Is there anything that we've maybe not covered that you want to cover? Because we've covered a lot of ground. I mean, we've talked about purpose and God and quantum physics and some element
Yeah.
of ethics and things like that. Is there anything that we maybe haven't covered that you want to quickly sort of drive home?
Yeah, let me think but I'll cap off what you said, like Charlie Kirk paid the ultimate price for what you just talked about. He was out there in the public ecosystem, the societal ecosystem, walking his walk, speaking his truth from his perspective, and somebody capped him, and took a husband away and a father away, and that's reprehensible, and shame to those who exploit that either way that they exploit that. This is a personal tragedy, and it needs to be seen as such. But that happens every day, and that goes back to what I was saying earlier with the vegan carnivore thing, that people co-opt an issue for their narcissistic self-gratification. So a lot of people who do attack you and troll you for one little thing you said or a misstep that you may have made 10 years prior, the calling out is usually again for self-gratification. It's masturbatory. Sorry, I'm not going to make a crude hand gesture, but it's vulgar. It's vulgar, and it needs to stop. So you can criticize somebody in good faith and say, hey, you may want to consider this. Start it that way and say, this is my take on what you said, and then you can acknowledge. And I see that you've reformed and changed. But no, most people are like, oh yeah, 1998 you said this, and you're going to be crucified for it. And again, that's when you get these tragedies like what happened to Charlie Kirk. And so take it down a notch. You're not that important. Neither am I. Neither are you. Nobody. You do important things. Let's keep it that way. You do important things. So let's see how you can do an important thing. And what does it do? Is it important just for you, or is it important for others as well? Gratify yourself, but can you also take that next step and gratify or help other folks? So to give a concluding statement, now that I did that little soapbox thing, I would say, in the context of everything we said, that if I could summarize where I would love to be a helpful person in this world, it is to say that um, let's all be guarded and cautious about how this is a continuance of what we've just been talking about. Let's be cautious about how we engage with others, and open and receptive because I think what will happen is the dichotomy will shrink if we learn to tolerate more. So we won't be so far to the left or the right. We'll come in a little bit, and we'll realize that there's common. We all have to breathe. We all bleed. We all eat. These are commonalities. And when we can expand that out a little further to things and not become ethnocentric or cultural centric or politically centered in one place or politically vectored in one place or another, that these commonalities start to show up and we don't dehumanize so quickly, and we learn to be more synthesis than antagonist. And that's my aspiration, is that we could go in that direction and, keep an open mind. Um, and that's a loaded word too, but just keep an open mind to how you express yourself, right? Keep your mind aware of what comes out
Yeah.
from you or what you write. And, are you being egocentric when you do it, or are you being more of a synthesis, interpersonal kind of person? And it takes a lot of work to do that, because we have egos, we have pride, we want to win, we want to be the big alpha type or whatever that is. But at the end of the day, that's all bullshit. When it comes back to finding out what our relationship is with the divine, that's not divine. It's illusion. And that gets Buddhist for me. Life is suffering. It's the Four Noble Truths. And one of those suffering modes of suffering in Buddhism is the desire. It's the want. And I would put narcissistic endeavor in the want category. It is a starvation. It is a privation. And we should all be narcissistic to a degree, but not pathologically, not to the detriment of others. We all have to have egos. Like you said, the individual has to build themselves up. That is good, healthy individualism. But the individualism that, I don't need anybody and don't you impose on me and all that kind of stop, stop. You wouldn't be where you are today without thousands, if not millions of other people working hard, both in the distant past and in your immediacy, to get you where you are. You didn't do this alone. And if we can have
Absolutely.
that humility to realize that, then you can be a good individual. And that's Jungian individuation again. It is the completeness of the self, but it is a dynamic completeness of the self. It is not just like, uh, you know, don't tread on me and all that silliness. You need little bits of that from time to time, but don't make that your mantra, your main force of your essence and your existence. So
Yeah.
that's what
It's
I'll
like
leave
the,
it
the,
with.
the
Is
desire thing you said before. I heard something Alan Watts said, it made me laugh. He's like, well, the teacher's like, well, you should not desire, but he's saying, oh, well, if I desire not to desire, like if I don't want to desire, am I not desiring to not desire? So it's like a paradox in itself. It's like if you mentioned tolerance, if you're too tolerant as a society, are you then intolerant of intolerance? It's a whole,
mm,
because I love paradoxes and fallacies and stuff. They're really intriguing. The whole in the Barber paradox, and we've talked about a few as well, Thesis, which is
yeah,
really interesting.
yeah.
But where in terms of your sort of work, obviously you've got your own podcast that we talked about at the start. What sort of things do you cover on there?
Okay, if you don't mind, I'll respond a little bit to what you just said, and I
Yeah,
think
again,
I'll butcher the guy's name, but I'll say Leotard, or I can't remember, but he did the libidinal economy, and then Jacques Lacan took that into Jouissance. Again, my French is terrible, but it is the pathological enjoyment. It is going too far in the libidinal self, and that one must, learn to regulate the desires, the drive, the eros. And that kind of I was just going to cap that off, and agree with what you said, is that we have to uh, gatekeep or regulate that the libidinal showing up and going too far. So it's pathological hedonism. You're going to exhaust yourself, and just like somebody who does methamphetamine or fentanyl or any of these really super powerful drugs, that's what it is. It's the jouissance, or I'm sorry, I didn't say that right, but anyway, that thing that Lacan was speaking of in the libidinal. So I'll stop there. So to find me, IdeaCast interview series on YouTube is my show, and I interview people from all over the place, from the lofty towers of academia, to arts and aesthetics, to everyday people who do coaching because they came from adversity and they want to help people. But it's folk psychology. It's just street level where I'm at, and that's where I want to meet people at different places. So yeah, IdeaCast interview series right now is where I'm at.
but how long have you been doing that for now?
I think 4 years last April, so almost 4.5 years, and 156 or 8 guests. I have a couple that haven't been released yet, but I think I have 155 out right now. So, but I have a couple in the can, as it were. So,
Perfect. Well, I'd love to do another one. We've covered a lot of ground, some really interesting, as we said throughout this discourse, where we've gone back and forth. Some ideas we've agreed, and some we've maybe gone off slightly, where you say, actually, yeah,
yeah,
but you've not looked at this
yeah,
or whatever, and that's the beautiful thing. I'm sure we've both learned something. I know I have,
yeah,
and
yeah.
and that's the beauty of it, really.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's something you can walk away from and be proud of is that we challenged each other and you brought new things to me and I brought some new things to you and that's what it's about. And then we move forward and it's like, yeah, I talked to Jivan and I said or you know, he showed me this and demonstrated this or I'll quote somebody else and so it's like that's where it's at. That's where, or Jeevan. I'm sorry. You told me that earlier, and I've already
Yeah.
said it. Jeevan.
So
Anyway, so you can call me Justino or
yeah,
Justin.
yeah, Justine.
Justine. Yeah, I
Yeah.
got called that a lot as a kid. But yeah, it. We're building ourselves as each other as we enter into synthesis, and then we move out, and then that nurtures us. It nourishes us. So yeah,
That's it. It's all about the love of wisdom, as they say.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Philosophia.
That's it.
It's a great way to end
That's it. Well,
it.
thanks for being a guest. As I said, and I'm sure we'll do a part two at some point because I'd love to cover
Okay.
some other topics because yeah,
Okay.
we covered a few, but I think there's a lot more to explore, maybe with some specific ideas and really
Okay.
going a lot deeper into one as opposed to more shallow as we've done today. But yeah, I think it'll be a great
Okay.
episode.
All right. I would love to come back, and I very much appreciate you hosting me and opening this space for us to talk together. I appreciate that. It
Thank
was
you,
fun.
Justin.
I
It was a
enjoyed it.
pleasure.
And thank you to the audience, those of you who I didn't trigger or get upset. I try to strike a balance. It's like I don't have a firm opinion about anything. It's like you said about Socrates. I don't know shit. I don't know anything. Some of it's just opinions. I don't know
Yeah, you've
anything.
got to be
So
like the waves. Like you've got to just go with the flow of stuff. Yes, you can have
yeah,
an idea, but you can't be so firm that you don't appreciate new information that can change your beliefs. A lot of people are like,
yeah.
well, this is it. If it doesn't, the confirmation bias like we talked about, it's like if that disagrees, well, it's bullshit. It's fake. It's whatever.
Yeah.
It's not. No, actually, okay, that may actually sway me to instead of being 10 out of 10. I don't know, miss like a view of X, I might be like
Yeah.
nine towards X now, and maybe
hmm
Y's over here at -10.
Right.
And with new information, I might go down the line and actually then the new bits, and I'm back up to 10 again.
Yeah.
That's life. My views now are not the same as they were at 15. I would have laughed at myself at 15 about some of my views now, and vice versa. I laugh at myself as a child. Thinking, is that what you thought, or and that's
Yeah. Yeah.
life in a nutshell. It's your actions or even your thoughts, your comments, your
hmm
the words that you maybe used to use, and even like you look back at your old hairstyles. Everyone has this, don't
Yeah.
they? Look back at their hairstyles 30 years ago, like wow. Is that what
Wow. Yeah.
fashion was like back then, and what people used to wear, and the hair, and so we are ever evolving creatures, and that's one of the great things about philosophy, as we've said as well, is that that's ever evolving. It's great to try and understand these ideas.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, thank you
It's
again,
it's
Justin.
it's evolutionary. So, yeah,
Absolutely.
Jeevan, thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
God bless.